My name's Ted. I'm 40, and I used to think I had everything a man could ask for: a good stretch of land, a strong back to work it, and a wife who smiled when I came in from the field. Sue and I had been married 10 years when everything started to change, but back then, life was simple. Good, even. We owned a modest but profitable farm just outside of Topeka, rows of soybeans in the back, some livestock near the creek line, and a white farmhouse with a tin roof that always sounded like applause when it rained. I ran the day-to-day, feeding, planting, fixing everything that broke. And Sue, well, she ran the books. She was sharp with numbers, could spot a decimal out of place from across the room. It was her idea to turn part of the barn into a small-scale processing area for organic goods. Jams, pickled vegetables, smoked meats, you name it. We sold at farmers markets and local stores, and for a while there, the cash flowed like creek water in spring. Sue was 8 years younger than me, but she had an old soul when we met. Or at least I thought she did. She liked quiet mornings, strong coffee, and she loved the land. Or she said she did. She used to talk about raising kids out here, teaching them to plant seeds and chase chickens barefoot like she did growing up in Arkansas. I believed her. Every word. And maybe that was my first mistake. It was a Thursday when I first noticed something was off. Nothing dramatic. Just one of those things that sticks in the back of your mind like a splinter you can't reach. Sue came into the kitchen wearing jeans a little too tight for work on the farm and a blouse I hadn't seen before. She said she was heading into town to meet a potential vendor for our pickling business. Claimed it was a woman named Rachel who ran a gourmet shop downtown. Sounded legit enough. Still, I asked, want me to come with you? She smiled too quickly. No, just a quick chat over lunch. You've got your hands full with the new calves anyway. She kissed my cheek and left with her laptop bag swinging at her side, one I'd seen more on her shoulder lately than ever before. The thing is, she never used to leave the farm unless we were together. For a while, I chalked it up to ambition. Sue had always been the dreamer between us, pushing for growth, modernization, marketing, all the things I didn't understand and honestly didn't want to. So when the business lunches became bi-weekly, then weekly, I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself she was investing in our future, that she was just hustling in a way I never could. But things started to shift. One evening, she came home later than usual, makeup still perfect, not a hair out of place, and she smelled like a department store instead of the usual mix of hay and hand soap. She said she'd been at a networking mixer and stayed to chat with some investors. Investors? I asked, confused. I thought we weren't looking for outside money. She brushed it off. Just exploring options. You never know what doors might open. Funny thing about doors, they open both ways, and sometimes they don't open for both of you. One night, I was in the barn late, cleaning out the feed troughs, when I saw her car headlights sweep across the backfield and stop. But she didn't come inside right away. Instead, she sat there, engine running, just staring at the house. I watched from the shadows, bucket still in hand, and wondered what was keeping her from walking through the door. Eventually she did. Said traffic was a mess, and I didn't press her. I still don't know why. Maybe I didn't want the answer. She started locking her phone. Changed her passwords. She had an answer for everything. Always just polished enough to sound believable, but never quite solid enough to feel true. Still, I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. That's not my way. Instead, I started watching. And what I saw, well, that's what brings us to where we are now. There's a strange thing that happens when the person you love starts lying to you. At first, it's not something you can prove. It's just a feeling, something off in the air, like the smell of rain before the clouds even show up. It sits in your chest, heavy and restless, and you try to shake it off because admitting it means pulling at a thread you're scared will unravel everything. That's how it started with Sue. Not with a big moment. Not with yelling or accusations. Just little things. The way her eyes darted when I asked about her day. The way her phone stayed face down at dinner. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful anymore. It was measured, thoughtful, like she was afraid of slipping up. I kept quiet at first. Told myself it was nothing. She was working hard, after all. She'd taken on more responsibility with the business, more meetings, more outside connections. She was ambitious, always had been, and I'd always admired that about her. Still, I couldn't help but notice that the jeans got tighter, the makeup a little bolder, the excuses a little thinner. One Friday, she left for what she called another vendor lunch. Said she was meeting a potential distributor in town. She kissed me on the cheek, her smile tight and distracted, and said, "Don't wait up." So I didn't. I went into her office instead. Now, I'd never been one to poke around in Sue's files. She handled the books, always had. She was organized, efficient, kept everything in order. I trusted her with it, and she never gave me reason not to. But that day, something told me to look. I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut, like a splinter you can't find but still feel every time you move. I sat at her desk, opened up her laptop, and pulled up the quick farm software she used for all our accounts. It didn't take long to see something was off. The balances weren't what I expected. A few of them looked too high, others way too low. And our grain contract with Hadley & Sons? Gone. Replaced by some company I'd never heard of, PF Holdings. There were 3 withdrawals labeled consulting, each for just under $5,000. That made me sit back in my chair. It's just enough to stay off the radar, just small enough to not raise any red flags, but together they could buy a used tractor in decent shape. I should have stopped there. Should have shut the laptop and gone back to fixing the chicken wire. But I didn't. Sue's email was still logged in. I know I shouldn't have read them, but I did. The messages weren't obvious. No love letters. No smoking gun. Just back and forths with someone called R. Talk of plans progressing, and Ted won't notice, and keep the LLC paperwork ready. That last one hit me hard. LLC? She hadn't said anything about forming a new business. And more importantly, she hadn't said anything about doing it without me. The next day, I drove into town like I was heading to the feed store. Instead, I parked outside the courthouse and asked the clerk if there were any recent business registrations under the name Susan Miller. The clerk handed me a file without so much as a blink. Right there on the first page was a brand new company. Harvest Valley Organics. Filed 2 months ago. Registered to our address. But with only one listed owner. Sue. My name was nowhere on it. I sat in my truck with that paperwork on the seat beside me and watched folks pass by. People I'd known all my life. Neighbors. Friends. Folks I'd helped fix fences for after storms. And in that moment, I felt like the only man in the world. Like the ground beneath me wasn't dirt anymore, it was quicksand. That night, Sue came home glowing. Not tired, not rushed. Glowing. She tossed her bag on the chair and poured herself a glass of wine before I could even ask how her day went. Meeting go well? I asked. Very productive, she said. We might have found a distributor for the new organic line. The what? She looked up, just for a second, then shrugged it off. I was going to surprise you. She was doing a hell of a job at that. Later that night, while she was brushing her teeth, I picked up her phone. Locked. New passcode. She used to leave it wide open, just like the doors to our home, and the smile I used to believe in. Now it felt like every part of her was behind a wall, and I was left knocking on the outside. I couldn't sleep, so I went out and walked the edge of the property. The moon was high, the field still. I needed to hear the crunch of gravel under my boots, needed something real, because nothing else was feeling that way anymore. The next morning, I called Frank Delaney, our accountant. Old school kind of guy, slow to speak, but sharp as they come. We met at the diner, sat in the back booth. He could tell something was up before I even opened my mouth. Frank, I said, I need you to walk me through the books. And I need you to tell me if Sue's been hiding anything from me. He looked down at his coffee. You sure you want to open that door? It's already open. Frank didn't sugarcoat it. Said Sue had been moving money out of our joint business accounts into a separate one for months. Called it marketing expansion, future development. And worse, she'd taken out a loan against the property, the very land I'd built everything on. I didn't even know you could do that without both signatures. Apparently, with the right documents and a good enough story, you can. Far as the bank was concerned, we were co-owners. Far as I was concerned, I'd just been kicked out of my own home without ever leaving. Later that week, she told me she had another vendor meeting, this one near the interstate. Something about meeting a potential investor. Said she'd be late. I told her I'd be working the backfield all evening. Instead, I parked my truck just off the highway and waited. I saw the red sedan pull in around 7. Sue got out wearing a dress I didn't recognize, her hair curled just right. And the man she met, he wasn't a vendor. He wasn't a business partner. He was younger, well-dressed, confident. They didn't even make it inside the hotel before they kissed. I didn't take a picture, didn't call her out. I just sat there, feeling like my chest was filled with cement. When I finally walked back home through the dark fields, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just stood in the kitchen, staring at the safe where I kept the deed and the old family documents. My fingers hovered over the handle like they weren't sure they belonged to me. Sue got home sometime after midnight. I pretended to be asleep. She smelled like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. And I knew. I wasn't just being lied to. I was being replaced. And if I didn't act fast, I'd be left with nothing but dirt under my fingernails and a name on a mailbox that no longer meant a damn thing. I'd love to say that after catching Sue in the act, kissing that man in the hotel parking lot, I did something brave, confronted her, called her out, packed her bags. But the truth is, I didn't do anything. Not yet, anyway. I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the wheel and the kind of quiet that you feel in your teeth. I couldn't even turn the radio on. I just kept hearing that kiss. Not the sound of it, but the ease of it. The way she smiled afterward. The way her shoulders relaxed, like that was her real life, and I was just something she had to tiptoe around. But what stuck with me more than the kiss was the paperwork. That new business she filed. The way she was siphoning money out of our accounts. The loan she took out against the farm. I'd seen emotional betrayal before in friends and neighbors. But this was tactical. Cold. Sue wasn't just cheating on me, she was planning to win. And I wasn't about to make it easy for her. The next morning, I skipped the usual chores and drove straight into town. Stopped by Frank's office and asked if he could dig deeper into the financials, not just the farm books, but everything. Credit cards, bank statements, anything with my name on it. He was hesitant at first, but when I told him what I saw, he nodded slowly. "You got it, Ted," he said. "I'll see what I can find." That same afternoon, I went home and pulled every paper file I could find in Sue's office. Bank statements, receipts, business cards. There were names I didn't recognize, consultants, attorneys, some marketing firm in Kansas City. And then there it was, tucked behind an old folder of seed inventory, a manila envelope marked confidential. Inside were printed contracts, signed, sealed, and ready to be filed. It was a proposal to transfer all ownership of the farm's assets, including the equipment, processing barn, and even our online storefront, to Harvest Valley Organics. Her business. Her name only. My name appeared once, under the current co-owner field. There was a signature line next to it. Blank. She hadn't forged it. Not yet. But she was waiting for the right moment. Maybe she thought I'd be too tired to read it. Maybe she'd catch me after dinner one night, hand me a glass of whiskey, and say it was just some updated paperwork for tax season. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just trying to grow a business behind my back. She was trying to take mine. I put everything back where I found it. Carefully. Slowly. Then I poured myself a drink and sat on the back porch until the sun went down. She came home just after 8. Said she'd stopped at the store, though there were no bags in her hand. Her lips were glossy, like she'd just touched up. Her voice was chipper, high-pitched, performative. I nodded along, gave short answers, smiled when I needed to. Played the part. Because now I knew. I wasn't married to Sue anymore. I was negotiating with her. Over the next week, I kept it all under wraps. I fed the chickens, fixed the barn door, rotated the crops. I even sat with her during one of her late-night budget meetings at the kitchen table, pretending to be interested in her new marketing strategy. She talked about converting one of the side pastures into a lavender field for Instagram content, said it would draw a younger audience. I nodded and sipped my coffee, pretending I didn't already know that she was planning to sell that same plot of land to an investor named Raymond Banks. Raymond are from the emails. Yeah, I figured that one out too. Meanwhile, Frank was pulling reports like a man possessed. Every day he called with something new. Turns out Sue had opened 3 separate credit lines under the business, all in her name, all maxed out. She'd also shifted our farm's tax ID into a new entity 2 months ago, meaning if she managed to complete her paperwork, she could legally show herself as the sole operator of the land and equipment. And the worst part? She'd already filed the request to remove my name from the insurance policy. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was preparing for a world where I didn't exist. The dam finally broke when I went to the bank to check on the farm's loan. I asked to see the file, and the woman behind the desk hesitated. "You're not the primary contact on this account," she said gently. "Yes, I am," I replied. "No, not anymore." Sue had filed a revision, claimed I was stepping back from operations due to health issues. She attached a doctor's note from a clinic I'd never even heard of. I wasn't just being pushed out of my marriage or my business. I was being written out of my own life. I walked out of the bank in a daze. Sat in my truck for 20 minutes with the engine off, watching the traffic light change colors like none of it mattered. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to Sue's soft breathing beside me, wondering what version of herself she was dreaming as. I wasn't scared of losing the farm. I was scared of how easy it had been for her to try. But here's the thing about being the guy who works the land. We're slow to anger, sure. But when we get pushed too far, we don't yell. We dig in. I wasn't going to let her take everything from me. Not without a fight. The next morning, Sue woke up to the smell of bacon. I was already at the stove, flipping strips and whisking eggs like it was any other Sunday. She walked in with her robe half open, yawning like she didn't just spend the last 6 months trying to gut my life from the inside. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "Thought I'd make us a real breakfast." She smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't touch the eyes. "That's sweet." Just felt like doing something normal. Truth was, I needed her calm. I needed her unsuspecting. I needed her to believe the man she was trying to erase was still asleep at the wheel. Because what she couldn't know, was that I had already met with a lawyer. 3, actually. The first 2 didn't feel right. Young guys, fresh out of law school, more interested in quoting statutes than hearing my story. But the third, her name was Grace Dawson, was something else. Late 40s, wore boots to her office and kept a black Labrador behind the desk. She listened. Not just to the facts, but to the silence between them. "This isn't just infidelity," she said after I told her everything. "This is premeditated financial fraud. Can we stop her?" "Oh, we can do more than stop her," she said. "But you've got to be smart. Quiet. You've got to let her think she's winning. That part one could do." Grace walked me through what we'd need. A full financial audit. Hard copies of every document I'd found. Video, if possible. Audio, if I could get it. Turns out, being the guy who fixes everything on a farm teaches you a thing or two about hiding things in plain sight. By the end of the week, I'd rigged the office printer with a mini cam, hid a recorder in the base of the lamp next to her desk, replaced the busted smoke detector in the kitchen with one that had a mic in it. And every night, I listened. Heard her talking to Raymond on speakerphone. Heard her laughing about how easy it was to keep Ted in the dark. Heard her say things like, "I'll have the paperwork signed by the end of the month," and "he still thinks it's a tax form." Each clip, I saved. Each one went straight to Grace. I was building a case, piece by piece. But I didn't stop there. I also called up a friend of mine, David Carlisle. Used to be in construction, now runs a private investigation firm out of Wichita. Quiet guy, solid as they come. "I need eyes," I told him. Discreet. "You finally pulling the trigger?" he asked. "Not yet. But I'm loading the gun." He sent one of his guys out the next day, a man named Tucker. Mid-50s, drove a beat-up Buick and looked like the kind of guy who fixed his own teeth. He parked down the road and kept logs of every time Sue left the house, who she met, where she went, and what time she came back. Even snapped a few photos, Sue and Raymond, hand in hand, outside a real estate office. Her signing something. Him smiling wide. They weren't just having an affair. They were building a future. Without me in it. One night, about 3 weeks into my little operation, Sue came home giddy. Told me we should think about selling off the back pasture. Said something about consolidating assets. I offered casually. She blinked. Just for a second. Right. It's a smart financial move. Maybe we should talk to a lawyer first. Make sure everything's above board. She laughed. "Oh, Ted, lawyers are just a waste of money unless you're getting sued." Funny she should say that. That night, I emailed Grace all the new footage. Then I made copies of every document and backed them up to 2 flash drives, one for me, one for the safe deposit box in town. I also made a third copy and mailed it to my sister up north. Just in case. I wasn't planning to lose. But I'd seen enough storms roll in to know it's best to prepare for the worst. The final straw came a few days later. I came home from the co-op meeting and saw Sue sitting on the porch swing, sipping iced tea, and staring out across the corn rows like she owned them. And maybe, in her mind, she already did. "I was thinking," she said, "we should hire someone to help with the animals. Free you up for other things." "What other things?" I asked. "You know, travel. Opportunities. Raymond's invited us to a conference in California next month. Big investor meetup. Us." She paused. "Well, technically me. But it's our business now, right?" There it was. The switch from our farm to our business. And just like that, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. She wasn't planning to take the farm out from under me. She already had. She just hadn't told me yet. But here's the thing Sue forgot. I may not know quick farm or investor pitches or how to wear a power suit, but I know how to survive a drought. I know how to rebuild a fence after a tornado. And I sure as hell know how to outlast someone who thinks they've already won. Because I wasn't just Ted the farmer anymore. I was Ted the man she underestimated. And the reckoning was coming. It was a Monday when the storm finally broke. Not a real storm, mind you. The sky was blue, the sun was out, and the air smelled like cut hay and fresh manure. But inside our little white farmhouse, everything was about to change. Sue was sitting at the kitchen table, typing away on her laptop. She looked peaceful, relaxed, like she had the world in her pocket and no one to answer to. She didn't even flinch when I dropped the envelope on the table in front of her. She glanced up. "What's this?" I pulled out the chair across from her, sat down slowly. My hands were steady. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. "That's from my lawyer," I said. Her smile froze. "Excuse me." I leaned forward. "I know about Raymond. I know about the new LLC. I know about the accounts, the loans, the forged doctor's note. I know everything, Sue." For a moment, she didn't speak. Just blinked at me, like she'd seen a ghost. Then she laughed, light, airy, the kind of laugh she used when she thought she was still in control. "Ted," she said, voice syrupy, "this is all just a misunderstanding. I never forged anything." "No." I slid another envelope across the table. "Because I've got audio of you telling Raymond the doctor owed you a favor. Want to hear it?" She didn't reach for the envelope. "You've been recording me?" "I've been protecting myself," I said. "Because somewhere between the pickled beets and the new lavender pasture, you stopped being my wife and started being my opponent." Now the smile was gone. She sat back in her chair and crossed her arms. "So what? You're filing for divorce?" "Already filed," I said. "But that's not the interesting part." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh." I nodded. "What's interesting is that I filed a motion to freeze our assets pending investigation of fraud and misuse of funds. The farm, the accounts, the equipment, none of it's going anywhere. Not until this plays out in court." "You can't do that." "I already did." She stood up so fast her chair screeched backward. "You blindsided me." "No," I said, standing too. "You blindsided me. I gave you everything, Sue. 10 years of my life. My home. My trust. And you threw it all away for what? A man with a city smile and fake teeth? Some fantasy about being a CEO? Don't you dare patronize me," she snapped. "You were always content to stay small. Just the farm. Just the land. I wanted more. We could have had more. We had enough," I said, my voice low. "We had peace. Roots. And you burned it down so you could feel important." She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance. "You were going to steal this farm from me." Her mouth snapped shut. I walked to the door, grabbed the keys off the hook. "My lawyer said she'll be serving you the full packet this afternoon. You can sign the preliminary agreement, or we can go to court. Either way, I'm not going to be the fool you thought I was." Sue didn't follow me out the door. I got in the truck, drove straight to Grace's office. She greeted me with a firm nod. "You did it." "Yup." "She say anything?" She tried to bluff. "That didn't last long." Grace smiled. "Good. Because now we make it official." She laid out the plan. The forensic accountant was already digging into Sue's LLC, the fake consulting fees, the unauthorized credit lines. Tucker had provided pictures, timestamps, even a dinner receipt from one of Sue's nights out with Raymond, signed with a company card. Evidence stacked to the rafters. We'd frozen her accounts, locked the farm's deed under a joint motion, and filed a request to remove Sue from any further administrative rights. It would all take time to process, sure, but the wheels were turning. Grace wasn't just a lawyer. She was a hurricane with reading glasses. That night, I went back to the house. Sue's car was gone. I walked the whole property before heading inside. The silence was heavy, but not empty. For the first time in months, it didn't feel like the walls were hiding secrets. I made myself a sandwich and sat in the living room with the windows open, listening to the breeze. I was still heartbroken, still hurt, still angry, but I wasn't helpless. That night, I slept in my bed, and I slept hard. No noise. No pretending. Just me and the land. It's funny what silence sounds like after a war. The house didn't creak the same. The porch swing didn't sway. The wind seemed to hesitate at the windows like it wasn't sure if it should come in anymore. Maybe it could feel what I was feeling. The next morning, Sue came back. I was out in the shed, fixing a busted wheel on the feed cart, hands greasy and mind somewhere between numb and clear. She pulled up in that gray SUV she used to joke was too nice for dirt roads. Parked crooked in the gravel like the car was in a hurry to get away. She didn't slam the door, didn't yell, didn't cry. She just stood at the edge of the yard in heels, arms crossed, like she was trying to figure out what kind of game we were playing now. I want to talk, she said. I didn't even look up. Should have thought about that before you moved the farm into your name. I never actually moved it. But you tried. I stood slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. That's like saying you aimed the gun but didn't pull the trigger. Still hard to ignore the intent. She sighed. You don't understand. No, Sue. I do understand. That's the problem. I was trying to save us. From what? Honesty? Loyalty? She stepped closer, her voice softening. You changed, Ted. I almost laughed. She kept going. After the business started doing well, you just settled. You stopped dreaming. I was the only one still thinking about what came next. No, you were the only one thinking about what came next for you. I was thinking about us. This place. The life we built. You know, the one you just tried to steal with a fake signature and a boyfriend in a sport coat. Her jaw clenched. He's not my boyfriend. I raised an eyebrow. Does Raymond know that? That shut her up. She looked at the shed, the barn behind it, the old fence line we'd fixed together 3 summers ago. I could see it hit her, for a second, just a second, what she was on the verge of losing. Not just the land, not just the money. The life. The story. I didn't want it to end like this, she whispered. Then you should have been someone else, I said. Because the woman I married wouldn't have done this. Her eyes welled up. I waited to feel something about that. Pity. Regret. Love. Nothing came. She tried again. Can we talk? Really talk? Maybe over dinner or... No. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't yell. Just said it clear as a church bell. No. We're past dinner, Sue. Past conversations. You tried to destroy me quietly. I just happened to notice before you finished the job. She swallowed hard. You're not even going to try to forgive me? You mean like you tried to forgive me for existing while you were planning my financial funeral? I tossed the rag onto the workbench. You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision. And now you get to live with it. She stood there for another minute, arms dropping to her sides, unsure of what to do with them. I walked past her toward the house. As I reached the porch, she called out, "This is going to hurt both of us, Ted." I turned, looked her dead in the eyes. It already did. Then I went inside and shut the door. Behind me, I heard her car reverse too fast. Gravel kicked up and scattered across the drive. She was gone again. And I was still standing. That night, Grace called. She said Sue had finally lawyered up. Some flashy guy out of Kansas City who probably charged by the smirk. She's going to fight, Grace said. Let her, I replied. She might try to play the sympathy card. Say you were neglectful, emotionally distant. Paint you as controlling. I've got months of recordings, I said. Emails. Signed affidavits. Financial logs. I know. I'm just warning you. The calm before the storm is over. Now comes the noise. I'm ready. And I was. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel strong. But I did feel done. And sometimes that's even more powerful. The days that followed were a blur of meetings and paperwork. Sue's attorney sent over a counteroffer that was laughable. She wanted half the farm, back pay from the LLC, and control over the storefront. Claimed she built the brand. Grace replied with a stack of evidence and a note that simply said, "We're prepared to go to court." Sue went quiet after that. But not for long. About a week later, I got a knock on the door around dusk. It wasn't Sue. It was Raymond. He had the nerve to show up in a blazer, no tie, like he was trying to sell me a car and not sleep with my wife. "Ted," he said, extending a hand. I didn't take it. He cleared his throat. I wanted to talk. Man to man. That's rich. She told me she was filing for divorce, he said. Said it was mutual. That it was all civil. I stared at him. She didn't tell me about the fraud stuff. Or that she was trying to take the farm. She lied to you? I said. Now you know how it feels. She's not who I thought she was. I leaned against the doorframe. And you thought I was just some dumb farmer you could outmaneuver. You both did. He didn't argue. You should go, I said. Before my dog smells weakness. He turned without another word, got back in his car, and drove off. I watched until the tail lights disappeared over the ridge. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Sue's little kingdom was crumbling. And I was still holding the deed. The courthouse smelled like old coffee and tired wood. You know the kind, scuffed floors, squeaky chairs, walls that have heard more heartbreak than they'll ever admit. I sat on the bench outside courtroom B, hands folded, dressed in my Sunday best, navy jacket, white shirt, no tie. I didn't want to look slick. I wanted to look like who I was, a man who worked the land and got blindsided by the person he trusted most. Grace sat next to me, flipping through a manila folder thicker than a feed catalog. She'd printed every email, every financial report, every photograph. There were timestamps, phone logs, recorded calls, even a notarized statement from Raymond. Yeah, Raymond, saying he'd been misled by Sue and had no idea she was still living with me when they started seeing each other. Funny how the rats jump ship when the water starts rising. Breathe, Grace said, not looking up from her folder. I am breathing, I said. Breathe quieter then. She was calm, collected. Dangerous in that quiet way some people are, the kind of woman who doesn't need to raise her voice to own a room. The bailiff opened the door. Miller versus Miller? We stood up. Sue was already inside. She looked different. Not weak. Not even nervous. Just like someone who'd rehearsed too long for a part she didn't fully understand. Her hair was pinned up, makeup flawless, suit crisp, the whole thing a performance. We sat on opposite sides. The judge, a lean man with silver hair and the expression of someone who'd heard every lie 1,000 times, walked in and settled behind the bench. Let's begin. The lawyers did their thing, motions, formalities, case numbers, and then it was time to talk about the marriage. The business. The betrayal. Grace went first. She laid it all out with surgical precision, the separate bank accounts, the LLC documents, the attempt to forge my signature, the misuse of funds, the coordinated plan to remove me from ownership. Your Honor, she said, my client is not a jealous ex. He's a man who was targeted, emotionally and financially, by someone who made long-term plans to take everything from him while pretending to build a life together. Sue's lawyer stood up like he'd just finished sipping expensive coffee. He was slick. I'll give him that, the type who used words like narrative and perception a lot. He painted Sue as a visionary, said I was resistant to growth, emotionally unavailable, and left the business work entirely on her shoulders. He tried to turn me into a bumpkin, a liability, a man who didn't know what his own business needed. The judge listened. When it was time for me to speak, I didn't use notes. I didn't need him. I'm not here to play victim, I said. I'm here to tell the truth. I told the court how Sue and I built the farm together, how I trusted her with the finances while I ran the operations, how things changed slowly, subtly, until I realized she wasn't just drifting away emotionally, she was building an escape plan. She didn't come to me, I said. She didn't sit across from me and say, Ted, I want out. She smiled. She kissed me goodbye. And then she moved my life out from under me, inch by inch, hoping I wouldn't notice until she owned it all. I told them about the fake doctor's note, the attempt to shift the deed, the bank accounts, the recordings. And then, I paused. I worked that land with my own hands, I said. Fed the animals, fixed the fences, repaired the irrigation when the system blew out. And I did it thinking we were building something together. She used that trust to start a new life, one that didn't include me, but relied on everything I built. I looked at the judge. That's not a marriage, I said. That's fraud. Sue didn't look at me once. When she took the stand, her tone changed. She tried to soften things. Said she felt unappreciated. Said I was emotionally distant. Said she was trying to protect the business by modernizing it, and that she never planned to take the farm from Ted. Grace leaned over and whispered, she's folding. This is her backup narrative. Then came cross-examination. Grace asked simple questions. Did you open a separate LLC without your husband's knowledge? Yes. Did you begin removing funds from your joint accounts into personal accounts? Yes, but did you draft documents to reassign business ownership without informing your husband? Sue hesitated. They weren't finalized. But you did draft them? Yes. Did you lie to the bank about Ted's health to change contact status on the loan? Her lawyer objected. The judge allowed it. Sue's answer? I didn't think it would hurt anything. Grace's final question was the nail in the coffin. Did you love him? Sue blinked. What? When you were making all these changes? When you were lying? When you were kissing another man in a hotel parking lot? Did you still love your husband? Silence. Then, I don't know. That's all the court needed to hear. The judge didn't make a ruling that day. Those take time. But when he adjourned and we stepped into the hallway, Grace turned to me and said, you won. Even if the paperwork says otherwise. Especially then. Sue walked past us on her way out. She didn't say a word. Not even a glance. Raymond didn't show. I guess some people only sign on for the fantasy, not the fallout. Back at the farm that night, I took off my jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and sat on the back porch. The sun was dipping low, painting the fields in that golden hush that only comes at the end of a long, long day. I told the truth, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The letter came on a Wednesday. Plain envelope. County seal in the corner. No bells, no whistles. Just a piece of paper that held more weight than 1,000 conversations ever could. I sat on the porch swing with a cup of black coffee, the dogs at my feet, and the fields stretching out in front of me like they always had, unbothered by people's messes. And I read it. The judge's ruling was clear. The farm stayed with me. Sole ownership. Based on documented fraud attempts, deceptive business practices, and a breach of fiduciary trust, Sue forfeited any future claims to the property or the business. Her name was to be removed from all operational documents and accounts. She'd get a one-time settlement, a small payout, barely enough to cover the legal fees her lawyer had racked up trying to save face. No spousal support, no share of the trust, and most importantly, no more access. I set the letter down beside me and just sat. I should have felt victorious, triumphant, but what I felt was quieter than that. Relief. Not joy, not pride, just the deep, steady exhale of a man who'd been holding his breath for too long. The next morning, Grace called. "You read it?" she asked. I did. "You good?" I paused. "I'm here." She understood. She might not take this lying down. "Oh, I don't expect her to," I said. "But I'll still be standing when she's done flailing." Turns out, I was right. The following week, Sue tried to go public. She gave a half-baked interview to a local podcast about navigating betrayal in business and marriage. Claimed she'd been emotionally neglected. Painted herself as a woman who had big dreams and no support. Grace sent the host a cease and desist the next morning, citing defamation. The episode disappeared within the hour. Then Sue called. I let it ring the first time, the second, but the third time, something in me said go on. Hear what she has to say, if only to close the door all the way. I answered. She didn't waste time. You won. I didn't say anything. I just wanted you to know, she said, that I didn't start this planning to hurt you. Intent doesn't undo damage. I know. A pause hung there like fog over the fields. You were the first person who ever believed in me, she said quietly. And you were the first person I let all the way in, I replied. Funny how we broke each other, huh? More silence. Then, her voice again, softer now. Do you hate me? I took a breath. No, but I don't trust you, and I don't want to know you anymore. That's worse, I guess. But it's the truth. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She just said, okay, and hung up. And that was the last time we ever spoke. That night, I stood in the barn, hand resting on one of the old beams I'd sanded and stained myself 15 years ago. I thought about everything that had happened. The secrets, the recordings, the courtroom, the look in Sue's eyes when she realized the game was over. And I thought about who I'd become. See, I wasn't the same man I was when this started. The man who kissed his wife goodbye thinking she was heading to a vendor meeting. The man who never checked the books because he trusted her. The man who thought we meant something unshakable. I'd changed, but not into something bitter, not angry. I just stopped hoping people would be who they used to be. Started trusting what they showed me instead. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, fed the animals, walked the edge of the property line like I always did. The sun came up slow, casting long shadows over the field. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that honesty brings. But I also felt something else. Free. They say you never notice how loud your life was until it gets quiet. For months, I'd been living in high alert. Reading emails like they were threats. Listening to phone calls with headphones and a notebook in hand. Watching the person I married become someone I'd never even go fishing with, let alone build a life beside. Now, all that was gone. No more court dates. No more whispered suspicions. No more Sue. The farm had settled into its old rhythm again. Cows lowed in the early hours. The rooster crowed too early. The barn creaked in the wind. And me? I got back to work. Real work. Not gathering evidence, not planning defenses. Just fixing fences, checking feed levels, putting my hands in the dirt like I'd done for decades. But I won't lie, there was an emptiness too. Not the kind that aches. Just the kind that sits with you. I didn't miss Sue. I missed the version of her I thought was real. The partner I thought I had. The life I thought we were building together. It's strange grieving something you never actually had, but I guess that's the trick of betrayal. It rewrites your memories, not just your future. One afternoon, I was trimming back the overgrown hedges near the old well when I saw Rachel's truck coming up the drive. Rachel was Sue's friend, or used to be. They'd met years ago at a community garden event, and we'd all shared a few meals and laughs over the years. But she hadn't come around since the split. She got out of the truck slow, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded. "Didn't expect to see you." "Didn't expect to come," she said. "Mind if I sit?" I nodded toward the porch. We sat in the shade, and I offered her a glass of sweet tea. She looked around, I scanning the fields. "Place looks good. Peaceful. Finally is." She nodded slowly, then looked at me. "I'm not here on Sue's behalf. I didn't think you were. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For not saying something sooner. For not visiting. You don't owe me anything." "No," she said, "but you deserved better. And I knew something was off months ago." She started acting different, talking bigger, more secretive. I asked her once if you were okay, and she laughed. That laugh she does when she's deflecting. I didn't say anything. Just let her talk. "She used to brag about how solid you were," Rachel continued. "Said you were the safest person she'd ever met. Then one day, she started saying you were holding her back. That stung more than I thought it would." I looked down at the glass in my hand. Funny. All I ever tried to do was hold her up. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you. I don't know if it helps or not, but it's something." Inside were a few screenshots. Text from Sue from months ago. Some about Raymond. Some about the LLC. One even said, he'll never see it coming. He's too content. That one landed hard. I folded the pages and set them aside. "Thank you. I thought you should know how early it started," Rachel said. "How calculated it was." I nodded. I knew. But reading it still hits. She stood. "Anyway, I'm glad you're okay. I'm getting there." She paused. "If you ever need anything. Company. Help on the farm. A pie. Just say the word." I smiled. "You make good pie." She smiled back. "That's what they tell me." And then she drove off. I stood there for a while, watching the dust trail settle behind her truck. Then I went back to work, finished trimming the hedge, fixed a hinge on the chicken coop, fed the barn cats. The thing about life after betrayal is, you keep doing the small things. You show up. You maintain. And slowly, the weight of peace starts to feel lighter. That night, I cooked dinner for one, poured a glass of wine, not something I usually do, and sat on the porch with the dogs and the stars. I didn't feel happy. Not yet. But I felt steady. And sometimes, that's enough. The harvest came late that year. Summer held on longer than it should have, and the corn didn't dry the way I wanted. I was out there every morning, checking the husks, watching the sky, and waiting for the kind of crisp breeze that finally whispers, "It's time." When it finally came, I didn't rush it. Just took it row by row, same way I'd been doing for years. There was something different about this season, though, not in the land, but in me. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I wasn't planting a future with Sue. I wasn't trying to save a business, or a marriage, or keep up appearances. I was just a man with a farm. And that was enough. Life had found its new rhythm. The dogs still met me at the gate every morning, the tractor still coughed twice before starting, and the porch still caught the evening light just right. Sue's name never came up around town anymore. Most folks either didn't know what happened or were too polite to ask. I preferred it that way. The people who mattered, folks like Frank, Rachel, even the woman who ran the seed store, they knew. And they didn't treat me like a victim. Just like Ted, the guy who stuck around, who didn't quit. I'd been meeting with a therapist once a month, something Grace recommended. Her name's Marla. She's got a sharp wit and a dry sense of humor, and she doesn't let me dodge my own thoughts. First time I told her I was angry, she said, "Good. That means you cared." I still go. Still working on some things. But I don't lose sleep anymore. One afternoon, near the end of the season, Rachel stopped by again. She brought one of those homemade pecan pies that still somehow tasted like a fall Sunday afternoon in your grandmother's kitchen. We sat on the porch, eating straight from the tin with 2 forks. "I keep thinking about what you said," she told me, "about being steady." I raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "Just, it's rare. And maybe undervalued." "Steady doesn't sell headlines," I said. "No," she laughed. "But it keeps the world from falling apart." We didn't say much after that. Didn't need to. When she left, she hugged me. Not long. Not romantic. Just a real, honest-to-God human hug. Like the kind you give someone who came through something and didn't let it ruin them. I stood on the porch a long while after she left. Then I walked the fields. The harvest was almost done. There's something sacred about that last stretch. You look at all you've pulled from the ground, and you remember every moment you thought it wasn't going to make it. Every bad storm, every broken piece of equipment, every long night spent wondering if it was all for nothing. And then there it is. A barn full of work. Proof you stayed. Proof you still believed in the dirt under your feet, even when the people beside you couldn't be trusted. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, cleaned my boots, and wrote in the little leather journal I hadn't touched in years. One sentence. The farm is still mine. And so am I. Then I poured myself one last glass of wine, stepped out onto the porch, and looked up at the stars. Some things end. Some things break. Some things get taken. But the man who's still standing? He gets to choose what grows next.